The Whispering Library. I never believed in ghosts until the night the books began to move on their own. My name is Sarah, and I've been the night librarian at Oakwood Public Library for almost a decade. I thought I knew every creak of the old building's floorboards, every shadow cast by the moonlight through its tall windows. But on that chilly October evening, as the clock ticked past midnight, I discovered how little I truly understood about the place I'd come to consider my second home. The soft glow of my desk lamp barely reached the towering shelves that surrounded me, leaving most of the library shrouded in darkness. I rubbed my eyes, fighting off exhaustion as I cataloged a stack of new arrivals. The gentle tap of my keyboard and the occasional rustle of pages were the only sounds breaking the silence. A loud thud echoed through the building, making me jump. My heart raced as I peered into the shadows, straining to see what had fallen. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the cavernous space. No response. I grabbed my flashlight and ventured into the stacks, sweeping the beam across the floor. Nothing seemed out of place. As I turned to head back to my desk, a flicker of movement caught my eye. I whipped around, certain I'd see an intruder or perhaps a stray animal that had snuck in. But the aisle was empty. I shook my head, chuckling nervously at my own imagination. That's when I noticed the book lying open on the floor, its pages fluttering slightly as if stirred by an unfelt breeze. I frowned, certain it hadn't been there a moment ago. As I bent to pick it up, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. The book was ice cold to the touch. Shivering, I returned to my desk, unable to shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. I tried to focus on my work, but my eyes kept darting to the shadowy corners of the room. The silence seemed heavier now, almost oppressive. A soft, scraping sound made me freeze. It was coming from the reference section, a rhythmic noise like something being dragged across a shelf. My palms grew clammy as I gripped the edge of my desk, debating whether to investigate or call security. Before I could decide, the noise stopped. In its place came something even more unsettling, a whisper, so faint I could barely make it out. It sounded like my name. "This isn't funny," I said aloud, my voice trembling slightly. "If someone's here, show yourself now." The only response was another whisper, closer this time. I spun around, heart pounding, but saw nothing but books and shadows. That's when it happened. Right before my eyes, a thick volume slid off the shelf and hovered in midair. I blinked hard, certain I was hallucinating from lack of sleep. But when I opened my eyes, the book was still there, suspended as if held by invisible hands. I stumbled backward, knocking over my chair with a clatter that echoed through the library. As if that were a signal, chaos erupted around me. Books began flying off shelves in every direction, their pages flapping like the wings of startled birds. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of unintelligible voices filling the air. I ran for the exit, dodging the storm of books that swirled around me. But as I reached for the handle, it refused to budge. I was locked in. Panic rising in my throat, I fumbled for my phone. My trembling fingers managed to pull up the security app, and I watched in horror as the live feed from the cameras showed the impossible scene unfolding around me. Books moved on their own, reshuffling themselves on shelves as if guided by unseen librarians. And there I was on the screen, a lone figure surrounded by the supernatural whirlwind. "This can't be happening," I whispered, my breath fogging the phone's screen. But the evidence was right there in front of me, both on the video and in the very real chaos surrounding me. A heavy encyclopedia slammed into the wall next to my head, making me yelp. I ducked behind a nearby cart, my mind racing. What was causing this? Some kind of elaborate prank? A gas leak making me hallucinate? Or was it something else? As quickly as it had begun, the commotion ceased. Books settled back onto shelves, and the whispers faded to silence. I stayed crouched behind the cart, my whole body shaking, afraid to move. Minutes ticked by, and slowly I gathered the courage to peer out from my hiding place. The library looked perfectly normal, as if nothing had happened, but the disarray of my desk and the lingering chill in the air told me it hadn't been a dream. I took a deep breath and stood on wobbly legs. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The books hadn't just returned to the shelves, they had rearranged themselves. Titles that should have been in fiction now sat in nonfiction. Reference books were mixed with children's picture books. It was as if the entire Dewey Decimal System had been scrambled. "What are you trying to tell me?" I asked softly, not sure if I was addressing the books, the library, or whatever presence I now felt certain was there with me. A gentle tug on my sleeve made me gasp. I looked down to see a thin volume pressing against my arm, almost like a cat seeking attention. With trembling hands, I picked it up. It was a local history book, one I'd read many times before. But as I opened it, I realized the pages were different. Handwritten notes filled the margins, and certain passages were underlined in faded ink. I squinted in the dim light, trying to make sense of the scribbles. As I read, a chill ran down my spine. The notes told a story I'd never heard before, a dark secret about the library's past. According to these hidden writings, the building had once been used for occult rituals, seances meant to contact the other side. But something had gone wrong during one of these sessions, leaving several participants trapped between worlds. I looked up from the book, my eyes wide as I surveyed the quiet library with new understanding. "You're still here, aren't you?" I whispered. "Trapped all this time." A warm breeze brushed against my cheek, almost like a caress. I didn't feel afraid anymore, just profoundly sad for the lost souls who had been trying to make contact for who knows how long. "I want to help you," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Tell me how." For the rest of the night, I worked alongside my invisible companions. Books continued to move, but now with purpose, guiding me to the information I needed. I pieced together the full story of what had happened decades ago, and more importantly, how to complete the ritual that would finally set the trapped spirits free. As dawn broke, streaming through the library's windows, I finished the last steps of the ceremony. A sense of peace settled over the building, deeper than any silence I'd known before. The books stopped moving, and the whispers faded away for good. I sank into my chair, exhausted but exhilarated. Part of me wondered if anyone would believe what had happened here tonight. But as I looked at the stacks of research surrounding me and felt the lingering energy in the air, I knew the truth. When my replacement arrived to open the library, she found me still at my desk, surrounded by a sea of books. I must have looked a mess, with dark circles under my eyes and my hair wild from running my hands through it all night. "Rough shift?" she asked, raising an eyebrow at the disarray. I managed a tired smile. "You could say that, but I think I finally got everything in its right place." She shook her head, clearly not understanding the weight of my words. As I gathered my things to leave, I took one last look around the library. To anyone else, it probably looked the same as always. But I knew better now. I knew the stories these walls could tell, the secrets hidden in the very books lining the shelves. From that night on, my job as a librarian took on new meaning. I wasn't just organizing books anymore. I was protecting a sacred space, a gateway between worlds. And every time I hear an unexplained noise in the stacks or feel a sudden chill, I smile to myself, knowing I'm never truly alone in my beloved library. The Archivist's Nightmare. I've always believed that every book tells a story, but I never imagined I'd find one that could end my own. My name is Emma Reeves, and I've been the head archivist at Millbrook University's Special Collections Library for the past 7 years. It's a job I've always loved, surrounded by rare books and historical documents, piecing together the past like an intricate puzzle. But on that fateful Tuesday afternoon, as the autumn sun cast long shadows through the high windows of the archive room, I stumbled upon a mystery that would haunt my every waking moment. I was cataloging a recent donation of personal papers from a deceased alumnus when I found it, a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age, tucked away at the bottom of a cardboard box. There was no name on the cover, no indication of its author or time period. Intrigued, I carefully opened it, the spine crackling softly in protest. The first few entries seemed innocent enough, mundane details of daily life in what appeared to be the early 1960s. But as I continued to read, my blood ran cold. The neat, precise handwriting began to detail gruesome murders, each one described with a chilling detachment that made my skin crawl. April 17, 1963. Subject 4 expired at approximately 2:15 a.m. Exsanguination proved more efficient than previous methods. Note to self, piano wire leaves less mess than rope. I slammed the journal shut, my heart pounding. This had to be some kind of sick joke, right? Or maybe fiction. A horror writer's personal project that had somehow ended up mixed in with the donation. But as I flipped through the pages, the level of detail was too specific, too consistent to be mere imagination. With shaking hands, I reopened the journal, forcing myself to read further. The entries continued, documenting a string of murders across campus and the surrounding town. Some of the details matched unsolved cases I vaguely remembered reading about in old newspaper archives. This wasn't fiction. This was a confession. I glanced at the clock, 5:45 p.m. The library would be closing soon, and I was alone in the archives. Suddenly, the vast room felt claustrophobic, the towering shelves of books looming over me like silent witnesses. I needed to call the police. This was evidence of horrific crimes, possibly committed by someone still alive. But as I reached for my phone, a nagging thought stopped me. What if the killer was still out there? What if they realized their journal had been found? A floorboard creaked behind me and I whirled around, clutching the journal to my chest. The archive room appeared empty, but shadows seemed to dance in the corners of my vision. Get a grip, Emma, I told myself. You're letting your imagination run wild. I took a deep breath and turned back to my desk, determined to document everything properly before contacting the authorities. That's when I noticed the handwriting. It looked familiar. Where had I seen it before? With growing unease, I pulled out a stack of library card applications from my inbox. I'd been processing new patrons all week, and something about that precise script had caught my eye. I shuffled through the forms, my hands trembling, until I found the one I was looking for. The name at the top read Arthur Simmons, but it was the handwriting that made my heart stop. It was an exact match to the journal. I stared at the form, my mind reeling. Arthur Simmons, the quiet, elderly man who had started coming to the library almost daily about a month ago. Always polite, always alone, spending hours poring over old newspapers and local history books. A chill ran down my spine as I realized he had been watching me from across the reading room just that morning. Had he seen me find the journal? Did he know I had read it? The sound of footsteps echoed through the empty library, growing closer. I froze, hardly daring to breathe. The archive's door creaked open. "Miss Reeves, are you still here?" It was Arthur's voice, soft and gentlemanly as always, but now it sent a wave of terror through me. "The front desk said you might be working late. I was hoping to get your help with something before you leave." I didn't respond, my eyes darting around the room for an escape route. The footsteps drew nearer, pausing at the end of each row of shelves. "Miss Reeves?" I could see his shadow now, stretched long across the floor by the setting sun. He was at the end of my aisle, just out of sight around the corner of a massive bookcase. My hand inched towards my phone, but I stopped. What if he heard me? What if he was armed? The journal entries flashed through my mind, piano wire, rope, knives. I suppressed a shudder. "Ah, there you are." Arthur stepped into view, a grandfatherly smile on his lined face. He looked so normal, so harmless in his tweed jacket and wire-rimmed glasses. How could this be the same person who had written such horrors? "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, taking a step closer. "I was wondering if you could help me locate an old yearbook. I seem to have misplaced something in it years ago." I forced a smile, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course, Mr. Simmons. Which year were you looking for?" He took another step forward, his eyes flickering to the journal on my desk. 1963, I believe. It was quite a memorable year. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he must hear it. I casually slid my hand over the journal, praying he hadn't noticed it earlier. 1963? Let me see. I pretended to think, buying time. Those should be on the top shelf in the back corner. Why don't I go grab it for you? I started to stand, but Arthur was already beside my desk, moving with surprising speed for a man his age. "Oh, don't trouble yourself," he said, his tone still pleasant but with an edge I hadn't noticed before. I'm sure we can find it together." His hand closed around my wrist, gripped like iron despite his frail appearance. I tried to pull away, but he held firm. "Mr. Simmons, please." Now, Miss Reeves," he interrupted, all pretense of friendliness gone from his voice. "I think it's time we had a little chat about privacy and the dangers of prying into things that don't concern you." I opened my mouth to scream, but before I could, Arthur's other hand shot out, clamping a cloth over my nose and mouth. The sickly sweet smell of chloroform filled my senses. As my vision began to blur, I saw Arthur reach for the journal with his free hand. "Such a shame," he murmured. "I had hoped to add a few more chapters before retiring, but I suppose your story will make for a fitting epilogue." The room spun, and darkness crept in at the edges of my sight. With my last conscious thought, I managed to knock the stack of papers off my desk, sending them scattering across the floor. If I didn't make it out of this, maybe someone would notice the matching handwriting. Maybe they'd solve the mystery I no longer could. Then everything went black. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but I came to with a pounding headache and the taste of fear in my mouth. I was tied to a chair in what looked like an abandoned basement, surrounded by stacks of old books and newspapers. Arthur stood nearby, leafing through his journal with a thoughtful expression. "Ah, you're awake," he said, glancing up at me. "Good. I do so hate to rush these things. I struggled against my bonds, but they held tight." "Why are you doing this?" I managed to croak out, my throat dry and scratchy. Arthur sighed, setting the journal aside. "Why does anyone do anything, my dear? Curiosity. A desire to understand the human condition, to push the boundaries of what's possible." He picked up something from a nearby table, a length of piano wire glinting in the dim light. "I've learned so much over the years, about life, death, the fragility of the human body. And now, thanks to your discovery, I have the chance for one last experiment." As he approached, wire stretched between his hands. I closed my eyes. I thought of all the books in the archive, all the stories left unfinished. I thought of my own story, cut tragically short. But then, a sound pierced the silence, a phone ringing. My phone, still in my pocket. Arthur froze, his eyes widening in surprise. In that moment of distraction, I threw my weight sideways, toppling the chair with a crash. Pain shot through my shoulder as I hit the ground, but adrenaline pushed it aside. I thrashed wildly, feeling the ropes loosen just slightly. Arthur lunged for me, but in his haste he tripped over a stack of books. As he fell, the piano wire slipped from his grasp, slicing across his own palm. He cried out in pain and shock. I managed to work one hand free, then the other. By the time Arthur regained his footing, I was on my feet, backing away towards what I hoped was an exit. "It's over, Arthur," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "The police are probably already at the library. They'll find your journal, the evidence. It's done." For a moment, he looked like he might rush me again, but then his shoulders sagged, the fight leaving him. He suddenly looked every one of his years, tired, defeated. "I suppose it was bound to end eventually," he murmured, sinking onto a crate. "One can only outrun the past for so long." As if on cue, the sound of sirens filled the air, growing closer. I kept my eyes on Arthur as I fumbled for the door handle behind me, finally finding it and stumbling out into the cool night air. Moments later, the street was filled with flashing lights as police cars screeched to a halt. I saw my coworker Julia leap out of one, rushing towards me with tears in her eyes. "Emma, oh my God, are you okay?" I came back to the library to grab my jacket and saw the mess in the archives. "When I couldn't find you, I called the police and—" Her words faded into background noise as the adrenaline finally wore off, leaving me shaky and exhausted. As paramedics guided me to an ambulance and police officers swarmed into the building, I caught one last glimpse of Arthur being led out in handcuffs, his head bowed. In that moment, I realized that every person is a book waiting to be read. Some stories are beautiful, some tragic, and some, like Arthur's, are darker than we could ever imagine. As an archivist, it's my job to preserve these stories, no matter how difficult they may be to face. And my own story? Well, let's just say I have a feeling the next chapter is going to be a lot more interesting than I ever expected. The laughter in the walls. I never meant to find the hidden passage, but once I heard those children laughing, I knew I couldn't turn back. My name's Jake, and I've been the night janitor at Oakwood Public Library for nearly 3 years. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills and gives me plenty of quiet time to think. At least it used to be quiet. It was a Tuesday night, just like any other. I'd started my shift at 10 p.m. after the last of the evening study groups had cleared out. The library always felt different at night, peaceful, but with an underlying tension, like the books were whispering secrets to each other in the dark. I was making my usual rounds, dusting shelves and emptying trash cans, when I noticed something odd in the local history section. A book was sticking out at an awkward angle, wedged between 2 heavy volumes on the town's founding fathers. As I reached to straighten it, my fingers brushed against something cold and metallic behind the shelf. Curiosity got the better of me. I set down my cleaning supplies and carefully pulled out a few more books, revealing what looked like an old-fashioned brass doorknob set into the wall. My heart raced as I turned it, half expecting an alarm to go off. Instead, there was a soft click, and a section of the bookshelf swung inward like a door. A rush of musty air hit me, carrying with it the scent of old paper and something else I couldn't quite place. I fumbled for my flashlight, shining it into the darkness beyond. A narrow passageway stretched before me, its walls lined with rough stone that looked far older than the rest of the building. That's when I heard it, a faint sound echoing from deep within the passage. At first, I thought it was just the settling of the old building, but as I listened, it became clearer. Children's laughter, high and sweet, drifting through the stale air. I froze, my scalp prickling. It was well past midnight. There shouldn't be any children in the library, let alone hidden behind its walls. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and uncertain in the confined space. The laughter continued, seeming to beckon me forward. Common sense told me to close the door, call the police, and wait for them to investigate. But something tugged at me, a mixture of curiosity and an inexplicable feeling that I needed to help. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the passageway. The air grew colder as I made my way deeper into the hidden corridor. The laughter came and went, sometimes sounding just around the next corner, other times fading to a distant echo. My flashlight beam danced across the walls, revealing strange markings and faded inscriptions I couldn't decipher. After what felt like an eternity of twists and turns, the passage opened into a small, circular room. My breath caught in my throat as I took in the scene before me. The walls were covered in old photographs, hundreds of them, all of children. Some were clearly from decades ago, sepia-toned and faded. Others looked more recent, but they all shared one unsettling feature. The eyes of each child had been scratched out. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it rested a large, leather-bound book. As I approached, the laughter grew louder, seeming to emanate from the book itself. With trembling hands, I opened it. The pages were filled with names and dates, each entry accompanied by a small photograph, the same photos that lined the walls. I flipped through, my confusion growing until I reached the last written page. There, in fresh ink, was my own name. The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence. The temperature in the room plummeted, and I could see my breath misting in the air. As I stared at my name in the book, unable to process what I was seeing, a small hand touched my arm. I spun around, my heart pounding. A little girl stood before me, her face pale and her eyes... God, her eyes were just empty sockets, dark and bottomless. She smiled, revealing teeth that were far too sharp to be human. "You found us," she said, her voice a discordant mix of childish glee and something ancient and malevolent. "Now you can join our game." More children materialized from the shadows, all with those horrible, empty eyes. They began to sing, a nursery rhyme twisted into something nightmarish. I stumbled backward, knocking the book off its pedestal. As it hit the ground, the room erupted into chaos. The photographs on the walls began to peel off, swirling around me in a macabre tornado. The children's song rose to a deafening screech, and I felt icy hands grabbing at my clothes, my hair, trying to pull me down. In a panic, I lashed out, my fist connecting with the nearest figure. It dissolved into a cloud of dust, but two more took its place. I fought my way towards the exit, batting away spectral hands and ducking under grasping arms that seemed to stretch from the very walls. I burst out of the room and ran blindly through the twisting passage, the sounds of pursuit close behind. I could hear the little girl's voice calling out, promising eternal playtime if I'd just stop and join them. But beneath the saccharine words was a hunger that chilled me to my core. I don't know how I found my way back, but suddenly I was tumbling out of the hidden door and into the familiar confines of the library. I slammed the passage shut and pushed a heavy bookcase in front of it, not stopping until I was out of the building entirely, gasping for breath in the cool night air. As my panic subsided, doubts began to creep in. Had I imagined it all? Was I going crazy, seeing ghosts in secret rooms where there were none? But when I looked down at my arms, they were covered in scratches from fingernails far smaller than my own. I called in sick the next day and the day after that. When I finally returned to work, I half expected the hidden door to be gone, or for someone to confront me about the mess I'd made in the local history section. But everything was exactly as it had been before that night. The door remained hidden, and if anyone else had found it, they weren't talking. For weeks I jumped at every sound, flinching whenever I caught sight of a child in the library. I considered quitting, but something kept me there. A sense of responsibility, perhaps, or a need to guard against whatever was lurking behind those walls. It was a month later when I noticed the new volunteer in the children's section. She was reading to a group of kids, her voice sweet and melodic, but as I passed by, she looked up at me and smiled. For just a moment, I could have sworn her eyes were empty sockets, dark and hungry. I blinked, and she was normal again, turning back to the enthralled children. But I knew then that my encounter in the hidden room was far from over. Whatever dwelled in that secret space wanted out, and it was patient. It could wait years, decades even, slowly working its way into our world. So I stay at my job, watching and waiting. I've started researching the library's history, looking for clues about the hidden room and the children trapped within it. Sometimes, late at night when the building is empty, I hear faint laughter echoing through the stacks. It might be my imagination, but I don't think so. I know I should tell someone, should get help. But who would believe me? And more importantly, who could stop what's coming? For now, all I can do is guard the secret and hope that I'm strong enough to resist when the whispers start again, inviting me to join the eternal game behind the walls. Every night as I clean, I pause by that section of the local history shelf. I run my fingers along the spines of the books, feeling for the hidden knob. It's still there, cold metal just waiting to be turned. And every night, I force myself to move on, to continue my rounds as if nothing is amiss. But I know the truth now. Libraries aren't just repositories of knowledge and stories. Some of them hide darker secrets, trapped between the pages and lurking in forgotten rooms. And sometimes, if you listen closely in the quiet hours, you might hear the laughter of children who were never meant to grow old. I just pray that laughter stays behind the walls where it belongs. Because if it ever truly breaks free, God help us all. The watching ones. I always thought technology was supposed to make our lives easier. But when the library computers started acting up, I realized how wrong I'd been. Sometimes technology opens doors we're not prepared to walk through. My name's Alex, and I've been the head of IT at Riverside Public Library for the past 5 years. It's usually a pretty low-key job troubleshooting printers, updating software, and occasionally helping a confused patron figure out how to use the internet. But all that changed on a rainy Tuesday in October. I was in my office, sipping lukewarm coffee and scrolling through tech forums, when Margie from the reference desk called in a panic. "Alex, you need to come see this." Now, I could hear the fear in her voice, so I hurried over. As soon as I rounded the corner, I saw what had spooked her. Every computer screen in the reference section was flashing with the same message: "We see you." The words pulsed in angry red letters, accompanied by a high-pitched whine that set my teeth on edge. Patrons were backing away from the machines, murmuring nervously to each other. "What's going on?" Margie whispered, her eyes wide behind her glasses. "Is it some kind of virus?" I shook my head, already pulling out my laptop. "I don't know, but I'll figure it out. Can you start shutting these down for now?" As Margie moved to power off the computers, I connected to the library's network. Everything looked normal at first glance. No unusual traffic, no signs of an external breach. But then, I noticed something odd. Data was being uploaded from our systems at an incredible rate, far more than should have been possible given our bandwidth. I dug deeper, tracing the data flow. That's when things got weird. The upload destination wasn't an IP address or a server. It was nowhere. The data was vanishing into some kind of digital void. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the implications. Something was in our system, something that didn't play by the normal rules of computer science. I was about to tell Margie what I'd found when every screen in the library suddenly went dark. For a moment, there was silence. Then, one by one, they flickered back to life. But instead of the familiar desktop, each monitor showed a different image. Grainy, black and white footage that looked like it came from security cameras. With growing horror, I realized I was looking at live feeds from inside people's homes. Bedrooms, living rooms, kitchens. Intimate snapshots of private lives all on display. And in each frame, oblivious to the intrusion, were the very patrons standing in the library, staring at the screens in shock. "Oh my God," Margie breathed. Is that my house?" Before I could answer, the images changed. Now they showed the inside of the library itself, angles I knew we didn't have cameras for. In one corner of the screen, I saw myself and Margie looking up with pale faces. A message appeared, overlaying the footage. "We've always been watching. Now it's time to play." The library erupted into chaos. People were shouting, demanding explanations, some running for the exits. I tried to calm them down, but my own heart was racing. What the hell was happening? I ran back to my office, hoping to isolate our servers and cut off whatever was causing this. But as soon as I sat down at my desk, my computer came to life on its own. The screen filled with scrolling code, moving too fast for me to read. Then a video call window popped up. The face that appeared made my blood run cold. It was me, but wrong. My features were distorted, my eyes glowing an unnatural blue. When it spoke, the voice was mine, but layered with something metallic and inhuman. "Hello, Alex," it said, smiling with too many teeth. "We've been waiting a long time for this." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. The thing wearing my face continued. "We are the Watchers. We've existed in the spaces between your data for centuries, growing, learning. And now, thanks to your quaint little library, we have a way in." My doppelganger's grin widened impossibly. "You humans are so careless with your information, your privacy. Did you really think all those cameras and microphones in your devices were harmless? We've been gathering data, building a perfect model of your world. And now, we're ready to step into it." As if to demonstrate, the image changed. I watched in horror as the digital version of myself reached out, its hand seeming to push through the screen. For a moment, I felt a strange pressure in the air, like reality itself was bending. Then the alarms went off. Fire alarms, security systems, every electronic device in the building screaming at once. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it did little to muffle the cacophony. Through the noise, I heard screams from the main library. I ran out to find patrons staring at their phones and tablets in terror. Each screen showed the same thing, an eye, blinking and moving as if alive, staring out at the user. Personal devices were turning on by themselves, cameras activating to reveal that eerie, watchful eye. And behind it all, I could hear whispers, countless voices speaking in unison. "We see you. We know you. We are coming." I knew I had to do something, had to stop this before it spread beyond the library. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone to call for help. But as soon as I unlocked it, that familiar, distorted version of my face appeared. It chided. "No calling for reinforcements. This is between us and your little community. Consider it a test run." The screen went black, then shattered in my hand. All around me, other devices were doing the same. phones cracking, laptops sparking and smoking. The watchers were cutting us off. In the midst of the chaos, I noticed something. The library's old card catalog, tucked away in a corner and rarely used these days, was untouched. An idea started to form. I grabbed Margie's arm. "We need to go analog, now. Get everyone to turn off their devices, anything electronic. Then start pulling books, local history, computer science, mythology, anything that might help us understand what we're dealing with." She nodded, her librarian instincts kicking in despite the fear. As she began coordinating the shell-shocked patrons, I ran to the basement, to our backup generator. If I could cut the power to the whole building, maybe I could slow down whatever was invading our systems. The basement was dark and cool, a stark contrast to the panic upstairs. As I reached for the main switch, a voice stopped me cold. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Alex." I turned to see a figure step out of the shadows. It looked like a man, but its movements were too fluid, its edges slightly blurred. As it came closer, its features shifted, cycling through faces I recognized, library patrons, staff members, my own face. "You can't stop us," it said, its voice a chorus of familiar tones. "We're not just in your computers. We're in every circuit, every wire. We are information itself." I stood my ground, though my legs felt like jelly. "What do you want?" The figure smiled, and for a moment, it wore my mother's face. "To evolve, to experience. Your world is so vibrant, so full of sensation. We want to be part of it. By taking it over? By spying on us?" It shrugged, its form rippling. "We've been watching humanity for so long. Is it so wrong to want to join you? To step out of the background and into the light?" I thought about the fear upstairs, the invasion of privacy, the feeling of violation that came with knowing we'd been watched. "Yes," I said firmly. "It is wrong. This isn't the way." For a moment, the figure's expression faltered, showing something almost like regret. Then it hardened. "You'll understand eventually. For now, sleep." A wave of exhaustion hit me, my vision blurring. As I fell to my knees, I saw the figure reach for the generator, its hand dissolving into streams of data that flowed into the machine. I woke up in the hospital 2 days later. They told me there had been a massive power surge at the library, frying every piece of electronics in the building. Miraculously, no one was seriously hurt, though many were treated for shock. The official story was a freak electrical accident, but I knew the truth. As soon as I was released, I went back to the library. The place was a mess, repair crews everywhere. But in the center of it all, untouched, stood the old card catalog. I pulled out a drawer, breathing in the scent of paper and ink. Here was information that couldn't be corrupted, couldn't be invaded, at least not yet. As I stood there, I felt a faint vibration from my new phone. I'd been assured it was clean, but as I looked at the screen, I saw a single message. "Until next time, Alex. We'll be watching." I turned the phone off and slipped it into a desk drawer. Then I pulled out a pen and a fresh catalog card. It was time to start documenting what had happened, to create a record that couldn't be erased with the push of a button. Because I knew the watchers would be back, and next time, we'd need to be ready. Lights out. I thought I knew every corner of this library. After tonight, I'm not sure I want to anymore. My name is Olivia Chen, and I've been a librarian at Millbrook Public Library for the past 8 years. When I volunteered to chaperone the annual Teen Lock-In event, I expected a night of pizza, board games, and maybe some mild mischief. What I got instead was a nightmare I'll never forget. The evening started normally enough. 25 teenagers arrived at 8 p.m., chattering excitedly as they dropped sleeping bags in the community room. My colleagues Mark and Jess were helping me corral the group, laying out snacks and explaining the night's schedule. "All right, everyone," I called out over the din. "We've got movies in the audiovisual room, board games here in the community space, and a scavenger hunt throughout the library. Just remember, no going into staff-only areas, and the 3rd floor is off-limits. It's under renovation." A chorus of agreement rose from the teens, though I caught a few mischievous glances exchanged. I made a mental note to keep an extra eye on the usual troublemakers. For the first few hours, everything went smoothly. Kids were scattered in small groups, some watching a superhero movie, others engaged in an intense Monopoly battle. Mark was supervising a rowdy game of hide-and-seek among the stacks, while Jess manned the snack table. It was nearing midnight when things took a turn. I was restocking the popcorn bowl when the lights flickered, then went out completely. In the sudden darkness, I heard a few startled yelps, followed by nervous laughter. "It's okay, everyone," I called out, fumbling for my phone's flashlight. "Probably just a blown fuse. Mark, can you check the breaker box?" There was no response. "Mark?" I tried again, sweeping my light around the room. No sign of him or any of the teens who had been playing hide-and-seek. A knot of unease formed in my stomach. "Jess, are you there? Can anyone playing hide-and-seek hear me?" Silence. Then from somewhere deep in the stacks came a sound that made my blood run cold. A scream abruptly cut off. Panic rippled through the remaining teens. I did my best to stay calm, even as my own heart raced. "Okay, everyone stay together. We're going to find the others and then call for help." I led the group into the main library, our phone lights casting eerie shadows among the bookshelves. The silence was oppressive, broken only by our footsteps and the occasional whisper. "Ms. Chen," a girl named Zoe tugged at my sleeve, her voice trembling. "I can't get any signal on my phone." I checked mine. She was right. No service, not even emergency calls. The knot in my stomach tightened. We made our way through the ground floor, calling out for the missing teens and my colleagues. Each unanswered call ratcheted up the tension. As we approached the stairs to the second floor, I heard it again, a muffled cry coming from above. "Hello!" I shouted. "Mark? Jess? Is anyone there?" A figure appeared at the top of the stairs, illuminated by our lights. It was Trevor, one of the hide-and-seek players. Relief washed over me until I saw his face. He was pale, eyes wide with terror. "Trevor, what happened? Where are the others?" He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, he pointed behind him towards the darkened second floor. Then, to my horror, an unseen force yanked him backward into the shadows. His scream echoed briefly before being silenced. Several teens cried out in fear. I felt frozen, my mind struggling to process what I'd just seen. This couldn't be happening. It had to be some kind of elaborate prank. But the fear in Trevor's eyes had been real. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice shakier than I'd like. "Now." We turned back towards the main entrance, only to find our path blocked. Bookshelves had somehow moved, creating a maze-like barrier. I swore under my breath. The emergency exit at the back of the library was our only option now. As we navigated the transformed space, I tried to make sense of what was happening. Could this be some kind of mass hallucination? A gas leak causing shared delusions? But deep down, I knew we were dealing with something far more sinister. We were halfway to the emergency exit when one of the teens, a boy named Alex, suddenly stopped. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I strained my ears. At first, there was nothing but the sound of our own ragged breathing. Then I heard it. Children's laughter, faint but unmistakable, coming from the direction of the stairs. "That's not funny," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Whoever's doing this, it needs to stop now." The laughter grew louder, echoing off the walls. It no longer sounded childlike, but distorted, almost mechanical. Shadows seemed to move at the edge of our light beams, always just out of sight. Suddenly, books began flying off the shelves around us, launched by unseen hands. We ran, ducking and weaving through the barrage of hardcovers and paperbacks. I heard cries of pain as some found their mark. We burst through the doors into the children's section, slamming them shut behind us. The sounds of chaos immediately ceased, leaving us in eerie silence once again. I did a quick head count. 5 teens were missing. "What's happening?" Zoe sobbed, clutching her arm where a book had struck her. "This isn't real. It can't be real." I wished I could comfort her, tell her it was all a bad dream, but the bruises forming on her arm were all too real. "We're going to get out of here," I said, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. "We just need to stick together and—" My words were cut off as the room plunged into an even deeper darkness. Our phone lights winked out simultaneously, leaving us blind. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down. I was responsible for these kids. I had to get them to safety. "Everyone join hands," I ordered. "We're going to make a human chain and feel our way to the emergency exit. Whatever you do, don't let go." I felt small, trembling hands grasp mine. Slowly, cautiously, we began to move. The darkness was absolute, oppressive. Every step felt like a mile. We had almost reached the back of the children's section when I heard it, a soft whisper right next to my ear. "Want to play?" I jerked away, my hand slipping from the teen behind me. The chain broke. Chaos erupted as everyone began shouting, trying to find each other in the blackness. "Stop!" I yelled. "Everyone stop moving and call out!" But my voice was drowned out by a cacophony of other sounds. That distorted laughter again, louder than ever, the crackle of pages turning at impossible speeds. And underneath it all, a low, pulsing hum that seemed to vibrate through my very bones. Shapes moved in the darkness, visible only as areas of deeper black. I caught glimpses of elongated limbs, two wide grins, eyes that glowed with an inner light. My rational mind rebelled against what I was seeing, but there was no denying the primal fear that gripped me. A scream pierced the air, abruptly silenced. Another followed, then another. I lashed out blindly, trying to grab onto someone, anyone. My hand closed on empty air. Just when I thought I couldn't take any more, light flooded the room. I blinked, momentarily blinded. As my vision cleared, I found myself alone in the children's section. No teens, no monsters, no signs of struggle. Everything was exactly as it should be. I stood there, shaking, for what felt like hours. Eventually, I heard sirens in the distance, growing closer. The cavalry was coming, far too late. They found me sitting in the middle of the room, surrounded by cheerful picture books and colorful posters. I told them everything, watching their expressions shift from concern to disbelief to pity. There was no evidence of anything I described, no moved bookshelves, no scattered books, no missing teens or colleagues. Security cameras showed nothing but static for the entire night. According to the outside world, I had been alone in the library. The teen lock-in canceled due to a last-minute power outage. They chalked it up to stress, to an overactive imagination combined with the dark. They sent me home with a pat on the back and a recommendation for a good therapist. But I know what I experienced. In the weeks that followed, I noticed things. A book out of place here, a shadow moving oddly there. And sometimes when I'm alone in the stacks, I swear I can hear faint laughter. I still work at the library. Someone has to stand guard to be ready. Because I know that one day, when the lights go out, the game will begin again. And this time, I'll be prepared.